Hello and welcome to WriterSpeak. I'm Mikala Kennan, and this is a show about books and those who produce them. I have with me today author Jeane Slone. She is the producer of two works of historical fiction. She flew bombers from the factories to the bases during World War II, and she built ships during World War II, both chronicling the lives and works of women who gave vital time, energy, and support, mostly behind the scenes, I might add, to the war fought largely by men. Her facts are detailed, her storylines are incredibly real and revealing of women's changing roles in American society during the 1940s. I'm happy to have her with us today. Jeane, welcome to WriterSpeak.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Good, good. Well, before we even get into the books themselves, tell us about your own passion for that period of history and women who were part of the war scene.
Well, I know when I look back on, how did I get started with this? I'm not your typical writer in that I had a full-time job. I'm the mother of 5 children, and I never thought I'd have a life of my own, but they actually grew up, and I actually retired, and I began to write. And I started writing simply because I was fascinated with a Mac laptop that my brother got me because he worked at UC Berkeley.
Wow.
And I was, having only been used to a typewriter, this cut and paste and the delete, it was like, wow, I can really have fun with this. And I thought I would write about my mother. And she was a WAC during World War II. She left me her scrapbook. It was about this thick. And I thought, this is all she would ever talk about, was being a WAC in the Army during World War II. And I read the whole thing, and I came to the conclusion that all she did was type for the colonel. And then I thought, oh yeah, women didn't do anything in the 40s, did they? But there was a tiny little article in her Army-based newsletter from Columbia, South Carolina, and it said, "Wasps fly into WAC's barracks." There were so many anachronisms back then. WASPs were Women Air Force Service Pilots, and WACs is Women Army Air Corps. And I then thought, wow, there were women pilots during World War II. That is cool. I had no idea. And I started asking everybody. I started asking people from that generation, and I found a lot of people didn't know there were women pilots.
That's amazing. It is amazing when you think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what they went through, they got to be, they got to fly over 77 types of aircraft. And then the war was over, and they applied to become commercial pilots, and they were told they could become stewardesses.
Isn't that amazing?
So they had only a 2-year period of independence.
That's one of the powerful things that I found in both books, especially kind of unearthing those little known details and facts that most of us were never told in our history classes.
Yeah.
They were never really given full credit for anything that they did. Give us just a brief synopsis of the two different books.
Well, my first book, She Flew Bombers, I have it written in the first person, and I fooled around with that a little bit, but I found it was better to have it in the first person so you could really see what it was like as a young girl being fascinated with planes and how it came about that the character became involved and joined the Women Air Force Service Pilots. And her journey into the world of pilots, being involved with men who were angry to see women pilots. It just was a real story waiting to happen. And everything in it is factually true. all I did was fictionalize the characters.
And the character in She Flew Bombers is Violet, very different from the woman who builds ships.
Yeah.
And her character is Lolly.
Yeah.
Just give us a comparison of the two personalities.
Well, Lolly was a very passive housewife who had to deal with 2 young children and had no clue how to raise her 2 young children. And her husband was a traditional husband who bossed her around, and she complied. And then he went into the Navy, and her entire world changed. She got to put her children in the first daycare center in Richmond, California, and experience what that was like. And she got to become a welder at the Richmond shipyards.
And when I read both of those, some of it is so different from our reality today and our sensibilities and our political awareness today, that you get this visceral reaction to Joe's demands for Lolly, so to speak, or the attitudes displayed toward Violet by some of these very strong, traditional thinking men.
Which really happened. And, I love when people will read She Built Ships and say to me, I hate that Joe.
Yeah.
And I always think, good.
Yeah.
That's what I was hoping for.
Right, right. Well, and the one chapter about how to tell a Chinese from a Japanese.
Yeah, that was real.
Yeah.
The Chinese actually wore buttons that said, I am Chinese.
How did you go about unearthing all the details?
With She Built Ships, I turned to quite a few oral history websites, which were so fascinating. The Rosie the Riveter website has interview after interview. So I would just glean real pieces of information from real people. And then the Den Show Japanese American website is where I learned all about what it was like to be a Japanese American and all the oral histories. With She Flew Bombers, I actually got to meet many women pilots who were in the WASPs. And I heard all their stories. There's not a lot written about the women pilots.
Right.
So that was a lot of real oral history that I got to learn about.
And just the whole idea of a daycare center, that there was the first one, and we take daycare centers for granted today, but this was a big step for her.
I know, and I was under the illusion that it would be a terrible place and there'd be whippings and ruler beatings on the hands, and it wasn't. It was really the precursor to Head Start. They were very avant-garde. They had a pediatrician on staff, and they gave immunizations right there. The women would put in their shift, then they'd get online, and they could get their dinner to bring home and eat with their children. They had overnight care because there were so many working shifts going on. And I was very fascinated by the Richmond Child Care Center.
Tell us a little bit more about the difference in writing historical fiction and even character development out of the context of facts, a base of solid facts, but then you create the fictional characters around them.
I read a lot of nonfiction and do a lot of research. And I get a character in my mind and I think about that character. I wonder what that character thinks about that piece of information. My characters, I like quirky characters. I like memorable characters. So I do make up the characters. Usually they're composites of people I really know or of people that I've from the oral histories. But the facts are, and the stories are really true, and that's what's so fascinating. You read it and you go, oh, this couldn't be true. That's what made it so interesting for me.
Yeah.
Every time I read a historical fact, I'd think, wow, this is such a good story. This really, really happened. Even the flash burn that Lolly got, that is all extremely accurate. And I've done a lot of hands-on to write the stories. I went to the welding class at the Santa Rosa Junior College and interviewed the welding instructor so I could learn what flash burns from welding is like. I got to fly in a 1918 Curtiss Jenny. I did aerobatics in a open cockpit PT-17 to know what it would be like for Violet. And when I do those experiences, I think about my character and I think what it would be like for her. And many times in particularly with She Flew Bombers, I wrote how much she enjoyed doing aerobatics, and I did research on what it was like to do aerobatics in a plane. Then I went in a plane and actually did the aerobatics with a pilot, of course, was doing the aerobatics, but I got to sit. And I could not believe how frightening it was. And then when I got out, I could hardly walk. My legs felt like jelly, and I was so confused. I couldn't tell whether I was, you can't tell the ground from the sky, from the barrel rolls, the loops. And I totally rewrote that entire passage after experiencing it.
Now, that's because it messes up your equilibrium?
Yeah, it is. I couldn't believe how terrifying it was.
I imagine, too, being in an open cockpit.
That added to it.
Held in by what? A seatbelt, I assume? Or?
Well, you were strapped in. You know what's interesting is the pilot was a real wise ass. But, he put a parachute on me. But on the other hand, never told me how to use it. And I had no clue how to use it. And then he says, oh, I see you have a camera. You should take as many photographs as possible. And I get up there and I hold on to that leather rim and I thought, there is no way I'm taking photographs. And I strapped my camera inside the belt because I thought I'd totally lose the camera.
Yeah. And can you not imagine, another thing that struck me in both books is the propaganda that was coming out. Your government needs you. You need to step up to the plate. You need to do the rations. You need to contribute somehow.
That's what it was all about.
Absolutely. And it was also a time when women's roles were changing. And this was certainly something that accelerated that whole process. But imagine the consciousness that was evolving in these women who suddenly had the opportunity to learn a trade, or in Violet's case, she's up there with the big boys, kind of just following her own passions, a bit unheard of at the time. So,
well, and they are two different characters, which is good in a way. With Violet, it's open-ended, but you just have a feeling she's going to go on to greater things and continue with, a pretty wonderful, adventurous life.
Right.
With Lolly, it's like, ooh, it looks like it's back to the kitchen and multiply. And her 2 years of independence is over because in interviewing a lot of the women, that's actually what did happen. They had, and that's all they talk about. They had 2 years in their entire life of adventure and independence. That was it.
Yeah.
Then it was back to being a housewife, back to knitting. Enjoy your new 50s appliances.
So it reminds me of kind of like when the old World War II veterans get together and they go back and, reminisce about what they did when they were on the shores or on the boats or
it was the
during
time
war.
of their life. And that's all my parents ever talked about. And when I look back on, when I research their life, I think, well, Mom, you were only in for 18 months, then you got pregnant, and all you did was type for the colonel. But when you'd hear her talk about it, it didn't seem like that at all.
No.
And then my dad was in World War II for 5 years, and he missed all the action, and he had fun playing poker in Alaska. And it's just coincidental for men.
Yeah. Go figure. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, talk to us a little bit about, now I know you're involved in some book distribution and these are available locally, but you've got a whole food and book combination going.
Yes, it seems like everything, I worked full-time and retired, and then jobs started being thrown at me. It's interesting how that can happen. But I brought my 2 books to the Bean Affair in Healdsburg. It's a coffee shop, and they started selling my book for me. And then because I'm a member of Redwood Writers Club, I was the vice president at the time, I started bringing a few other members, and we have over 250 members.
Excellent.
And I was really, really surprised how happy I was to see another author's book selling. And I'm not a salesperson. And then it just grew and grew, and I thought, well, let's see, I'd like to get a coffee shop in every town in Sonoma County. And I got one in Petaluma, and Geyserville, and Cloverdale, and all over the county. And this is a big county. And then I started getting overwhelmed because it started to become successful, and I ended up with 95 titles.
Wow.
I didn't even realize I would end up with 95 titles. And believe me, it's been really fun to say no to Marin and Napa.
Truly keeping it local.
Which I always do.
Sure.
So I hired an assistant, Mona Meckling, and she's a member of Redwood Writers. So she distributes one end of the county, and I distribute the other. And then I was successfully selling books at Gaia's Garden here in Santa Rosa. And Ari, the manager there, and Susan's the owner, they said, hey, you should do an event here. And I thought, I'm not an event person, I'm not an MC. And he said, oh, it'd be fun, we can call it Dining with Authors. And I thought, it was all his idea. And he says to me, and you can do it the second Monday, of every month. And I thought, I'm not doing it every month. We'll try it once. And he wanted the second Monday because Monday's always dead for restaurants. And I thought, okay, I'll try it for a month. And he goes, and then we'll have people make reservations to sit with the authors.
Oh, boy.
And, being an author, I'm thinking, nobody's going to want to sit with an author. Nobody's going to call and make a reservation. And it really, really happened. People, and we've been doing it for about 9 months now. People call and make reservations to dine with a particular author, and they email me to sit with a particular author, and we have 5 new authors every single month. And then Redwood Cafe said, I hear you're doing a Dining with Authors at Gaia's Garden. Will you do one here? And I thought, I live in Healdsburg. What do I want to go to Catania for? And so I trained Mona Meckling, and she started doing Wine and Dine with the local authors. And that's the 4th Tuesday of every month. So the authors are, selling their books at all these local shops and wineries. I'm starting to get wineries now, which is so exciting. I'm distributing books at Pedroncelli Winery in Geyserville and Ramazzotti Winery in Geyserville. And so the wineries are getting excited about selling local authors' books too.
That's great. So that's actually heartwarming, because in this day of ebooks and electronics, it's kind of nice to hear that people are interested in being one-on-one.
They're still reading.
Well,
I
that's
don't
great.
know why people are saying otherwise, but people love to meet the authors, like to know. And the great thing of adding with dining with the authors is the author reads for 5 minutes, then the audience asks questions for 5 minutes. And the questions make it so fascinating. What made you write that? Where did you get your ideas for characters? Why did you write in first person?
A sophisticated audience.
Yeah, because usually a lot of authors go too. And then what I tell people, if they think the book's going to be boring, 5 minutes later, another author's up. So it's not one author presenting. That's what makes it really work. It's 5 authors every month.
Okay.
And you may end up liking a book that you thought you wouldn't like.
Do you think in part that's because they actually get to know the backstory?
Maybe.
Of each book?
Maybe. Or, how much can you really get out of looking at the cover? That's the other part. They go, oh, wow, I saw that cover and I thought it would be like this, so I wasn't interested.
Right.
But they really hear a little bit in depth as to what the book is about. And that makes it interesting.
But that's an interesting social observation, isn't it? That we make our judgments on colors or designs or something like that.
Yeah, and I do tell a lot of authors the cover is important. The phrase, you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, comes from the 1800s, when all the covers were gray and black and maroon and had no pictures whatsoever on them. If you look back on the covers then. And yeah, you couldn't judge a cover and tell how the book would be back then. But now, title is everything, and design is everything. And I've even, from doing this, I've actually told an author, I loved your book and I read it, but the title's not working. And she was traditionally published. And I knew, the publisher decides on the title if you're not self-published and design your own book. And she went back and talked to the publisher and changed the title, and now it's selling.
So give us an example. How would this be not attractive to people?
Well, I can only guess. I'm too involved in my own works, but I'm always wondering, does my generation, because, so many people say to me, oh, were you a WASP? I go, no, I wasn't even born in the 40s. But I always wonder, are they just focusing on World War II? Oh, I'm not interested in World War II. Well, I never was either. And I marched in Washington on the Peace March against the war in Vietnam. And I'm not a vet myself. So really, I'm not coming from that background. But I did kind of worry that, people would be turned off. Like, oh, war book, oh, because I might have been. But it's really a lot about what it was like to be a woman during that time.
And that's a story that hasn't been told.
I don't believe it has been told enough.
At least that particular niche of the whole women's evolution.
What was fun for me especially was to put real historical photos interspersed in the book, so it really seems real. The first edition of She Flew Bombers has no photographs in it. So it was really fun to make a second edition. And having the photograph when she's saying goodbye to her children at the daycare center, there's a real photograph of a woman in a snood saying goodbye to her children at the daycare center. So that was fun.
Sure. It's also visually more interesting because it helps you put things in context. You can see the little corner store, or you can see the uniforms, you can
Yeah,
just
it
take it
was
right back
fun.
to those period decors and the trends of the time. So
I just really enjoy historical fiction.
Yeah.
And it is fun to put photographs in books because it brings you right there then.
yeah, yeah.
And we have the technology to do that.
And did you have to get certain copyright permissions?
I did, and I had to pay also. Wendy the welder here, who is really Dorothy Price, I had to pay for her from the Richmond Historical Museum. And she won the Wendy the welder contest. And I just loved, I have her original. And I would put that by my desk and just look at her and look at her. I love her complexion and just her stance, you know. And she was an inspiration to me to look at her photograph. She's a real woman who won the Wendy the Welder contest.
And she's still around?
No, and they can't find her. And the name Dorothy Price is too common. And I guess that's why I was able to get permission for it. It probably would have been more involved. But I paid also for a photograph of, this is a real sketch made by a famous artist of a Japanese American, and that's her when she was forced to leave and become interned at the Tanfran horse stables.
Well, I wish you continued luck. Is there anything else in the works right now?
Yeah, a lot of people ask me that, and writing historical fiction takes between 2 to 3 years. People don't realize that. It's not just coming out of my head spontaneously. And so I've been working on She Was a Spy during World War II for 2 years now. And to give myself strength to keep this up, I tell people, I've got another year to go.
Of course.
Because it's about American women spies. And not a lot has been written about American women spies during World War II. So I've been researching spy school, which actually existed.
I bet it did.
And so that's what I'm working on now. It's been a lot of fun, and I've had adventures, which is what I always like to do. I need my hands on. I got to shoot a World War II Colt 45.
Oh, boy.
Because I needed to know what that was like for a woman to shoot a gun.
Thank you once again, Jeannie. It's been great. I'm looking forward to the Spy sequel, and thank you for all you're doing to help elevate our awareness and bring these stories into light. Very much appreciate it.
It's been a nice adventure for me.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good. And thank you to our viewing audience for tuning in to WriterSpeak. We're happy that you spent some time with us. We'll see you again next time.